You can already bet on almost any sporting event in the world. Now, imagine betting on politics, war, terror attacks, the weather, or even the box office of a movie debut. You can. And that's the subject of today's podcast. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Same Life. On each episode of my weekly podcast, a different topic, discussion, commentary, or story from our lives.
Season 19, Chapter 8.
Predictive
Markets.
Predictive markets, sometimes called prediction markets, information markets, or idea futures. Essentially, betting platforms based on the outcomes of world events. They started to gain popularity about a decade ago, but lately have seen explosive growth. Two of the biggest, Kalshi and Polymarket, report trading volumes of approximately $2.3 billion per week. I would describe predictive markets as a mix of sports betting and the stock market. It is gambling, and often done online by those partaking. And after all, hasn't the stock market always been the world's biggest casino? Predictive markets, like Kalshi and Polymarket, allow anyone to bet, and bet more in a stock market kind of way, on the outcomes of just about anything. Will Greenland belong to the U.S. by June? Will the president of Portugal be re-elected? Will the next Toy Story movie win the box office on opening weekend? Will it rain tomorrow? Accepting your bets now on all of that and more. There's a parallel here, I think, to prop bets. And this is people's willingness to bet on just about anything. Prop bets are most associated with the Super Bowl, and they are short for proposition bets. So before the Super Bowl, you can make all sorts of bets that are related to the game itself. Final score, halftime score, point spread, total points over, under, etc., etc. The prop bet, propositions, allow you to wager on who will win the coin toss, the length of the national anthem, the color of the Gatorade dumped on the winning coach, and one of my favorites from last year, will any NFL players be arrested before the game? There's tons of prop bets. I think there had to be someone who said, hey, if people are willing to put money on all of this crazy stuff, then they certainly would bet on the next leader of Venezuela, or what language the Pope will use in his next press conference, and people were willing. As I said, almost $2.5 billion per week on predictive markets. In some ways, we've done this kind of thing all of our lives. On long road trips, we used to bet on the color of the next car to pass the other way. I'll bet I can run to the corner and touch the stop sign before you. How many jelly beans in that jar? Yeah, we were only kids, but we were doing some gambling. You betcha. One of my favorite old jokes is about these two guys sitting at the bar, and there's an old John Wayne movie on the TV. First guy says, I'll bet you $10 that John Wayne falls off his horse before the end of the movie. Second guy says, okay, you're on. Sure enough, in the last scene of the film, John Wayne falls off his horse. So the guy who lost the bet hands over the $10. So then the first guy says, honestly, I can't take your money. I was just messing with you. I've seen this movie before, and I know that John Wayne falls off the horse at the end of the movie. Second guy says, yeah, I've seen it before too. I just didn't think he'd do it again. To understand the growth of this predictive market, I think it's important to understand the growth of gambling in general. I'm old enough to remember when gambling, at least for the general population, was bingo at the church, raffle tickets, the racetrack, maybe a football pool at the office. And my dad knew a guy who could get you genuine tickets on the Irish sweepstakes. If you wanted to engage in legal gambling, you had to go to Las Vegas, maybe Atlantic City, but Vegas was the goal. Vegas even embraced the greed, the avarice, the excessive desire for material gain and the gratification of the flesh, the lack of self-control and neglect of responsibility. That was Vegas. They were Sin City, and they stood by that moniker. And just like making a confession to a priest or talking to your lawyer, they promised confidentiality, Vegas client privilege. Whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. In due time, various states began to see the benefits of legalized gambling, both as a direct income and from tourism. By the 90s, 13 states had legalized gambling. Today, if you count state-run lotteries, 48 states in every Canadian province have at least some sort of legalized gambling. Lotteries are called a tax on the stupid, and every day thousands of them line up to dutifully pay that tax. Anyone who lives in or near a major urban area in North America is probably only an hour or two away from a casino. These places may not have residencies by Celine Dion, Britney Spears, or even Def Leppard, but they do have gambling, and that's the point. With this also came the growth of sports gambling, which was also once a Vegas exclusive. Sports gambling is usually run through legislative lotteries. You can bet on sports. The next big shift was, of course, digital. Today there are dozens and dozens of online betting apps. DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, names which we recognize because they frequently advertise on social and traditional media, often during the very sporting events they want you to bet on. These apps are promoted and endorsed by any number of celebrities, from Jamie Foxx to Wayne Gretzky. The province of Ontario and some other jurisdictions have recently banned gambling app ads that use celebrities and known influencers. Either way, too little, too late. Online sports betting is huge, and online gambling beyond sports. Poker, slots, blackjack, roulette, all as ubiquitous as bottled water. So the effort to gamble went from booking a hotel and a flight and taking time off work to simply tapping on a smartphone. That ease of access alone would guarantee a huge increase in gambling activity. So we have this quantum leap in the increase of gambling, the instant access, and people's inclination to bet on anything. And that combination easily set the scene for predictive markets. And there was one other major event that led to this, but I'll get to that in a bit. I mentioned earlier that predictive markets, in my opinion, are like a blend of sports gambling and the stock market. So here's how they work. Let's say on a sports betting site, I want to bet that the Bruins will beat the Flyers. I will bet $1. The sports gambling site may give me some odds. In some sports, there's a point spread. There's various bets I can make, but in order for me to profit on that dollar, I have to wait for the outcome of the game, the Bruins-Flyers game. And my Bruins have to win. I bet them to win. I'm gambling on them winning. Now let's go to a predictive market app and use the example of, will it rain tomorrow? I see that 30% say yes, it will rain tomorrow, and 70% say no, it will not. I think it's going to be yes, and I've got this dollar, but I'm not betting $1. I'm buying one share, in this case for 30 cents, that says it's going to rain. Tomorrow, if it does rain, I will get $1. Net profit, 70 cents. Here's the difference from sports betting. Let's say a few hours have passed, maybe even just a few minutes, and the site now went from 30-70 to 50-50. That share of yes, it's going to rain is now worth 50 cents. I bought mine for 30. So I can now sell that share and make 20 cents, even before tomorrow comes. Of course, I can also hold on to it and wait to see about those showers. So unlike sports betting, I don't have to wait for the outcome to show a profit. I'm betting, yes, but really I'm buying shares. And like any stock investor, I'm hoping those shares go up in value. And again, sell them at any time I wish, either to make a profit or cut my losses. And unlike the stock market, where you might buy some solid shares and hold on to them for years and years in your portfolio, predictive markets are usually fixed date events. You're trying to predict something that's going to happen in the not too distant future. For example, the Kalshi bet says a deal for Greenland will be reached before the end of Trump's term. That's what you're betting or buying shares in. The fixed timeline. You can wager or speculate on whether Costco will raise the price of their hot dogs by this summer, on any number of things related to Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. How about the 7-day average of the New York City subway ridership? Up or down? It's crazy. Kalshi alone offers almost 3,000 different bets, markets. Kalshi and Polymarket are the two biggest right now. Incidentally, Donald Trump Jr. is involved in both. He's on the board at Kalshi and a strategic advisor for Polymarket. Also, Kalshi is a U.S.-based federally regulated group. Kalshi is Arabic for everything, implying what their market offerings can cover. Everything. Polymarket is a global entity not overseen by the U.S. government. Laws and practices apply to both. But in America, the feds actually regulate Kalshi the way they would any trading market. Generally, this means Kalshi would have tighter rules around things like insider trading and the use of classified information, similar to a regular stock exchange. Example, and by the way, several very credible news organizations have reported this. Only hours before the U.S. invaded Venezuela, capturing President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, someone bet 32 grand on Polymarket that Maduro would be ousted as president before the end of January 2026. The morning after the bet, news hit of the U.S. invasion. That wager of $32K paid out $400,000. Who bet that? Who knew what? When? Who made all that cash? We do not know. It's also not clear if any investigation into that transaction will be initiated. It was Polymarket. If it was Kalshi, you can bet that senators and Congress would be fighting for TV time to call for a probe. Note that Canada does have an emerging predictive market economy, but it is more heavily regulated and still in a development stage, at least compared to the U.S. and other markets. Criticism of this business model is that it's just more gambling, and because of digital, it enables anyone with a smartphone to bet money. It's a get-rich-quick scheme. It's not much different than these apps now that allow you to be your own stockbroker, even dealing in relatively small amounts of money. These apps are now after you and your $10, your $20, your $100. I guess they thought, hey, if we can't get somebody to give us $1 million, why don't we just get 1 million people to give us $1 each? Stock exchange, the predictive markets, gambling apps, they're all just versions of crowdfunding ventures. So there's plenty of criticism about predictive markets. But here's what else some are saying. Let's focus on that word predictive. Remember, also known as prediction markets. Experts are asking, what can the collective consensus, the collective consciousness, do to actually predict world events? Back to the example of sports betting. You know, if the odds of your team winning are, say, 10-1, well, this is based on a lot of information. And how many people are willing to wager on your team? It's the so-called wisdom of the crowd. These people don't just put odds of 10-1 hoping to pay out a lot of money to people. Based on all of this, it is safer to assume the team whom the odds favor will be victorious. We use this as prediction. We say it all the time. Who do you think is going to win the game? Well, the odds favor these guys. Well, then what if instead of just a Flyers-Bruins game, we can let the collective consciousness tell us the future of the Ayatollah in Iran? We survey the market via a wagering app and let the market tell us what they think is going to happen. Markets dictate, and often they're good at predictions. Who's the market? We are. We predict how much we like electric cars, or if we want strawberries in our yogurt. Some even argue that predictive markets will one day replace pollsters as a way of judging outcomes. Others say that predictive markets actually rely heavily on those pollsters as a way of offering their stocks. Either way, the predictive properties of market investments are being closely scrutinized right now as operations like Kalshi and Polymarket exist. This is related. A while back, I did a podcast on something called the failure of imagination. Failure of imagination, it is often used as an explanation as to how some people, groups, countries become vulnerable to attack. They fail to imagine a situation. To explain, they use this statement: I want you to think of something that you would never think of. It's impossible, because as soon as you think of it, you've thought of it. If you follow what I'm saying, we can't think of everything. We can't imagine everything. In military, that's why they run war games, simulations, because they bring up circumstances and events that may not have been anticipated. Now that's for military conflict. But what kind of war games could we run for everything else? What kind of simulations? Well, maybe predictive markets are that thing. I also mentioned in that podcast that after 9/11, Washington invited 30 top Hollywood writers, directors, and filmmakers to imagine other ways that terrorists might attack the United States. So in other words, whatever they didn't see coming, the next time, maybe we'll see it coming. No more failure of imagination. And here's that other part of the emergence of predictive markets. It was also after 9/11 that Admiral John Poindexter suggested to the Bush administration that he form a policy analysis market. Poindexter was head of the Pentagon's Total Information Awareness Program, and this is what he thought: that an online futures market where people could bet on the likelihood of events like terrorist attacks, assassinations, or coups would be extremely helpful. And part of the strategy was not only that markets would dictate and perhaps predict, but that they could look into who was betting on what, when, and where, and be able to step in beforehand. The program faced immense criticism. What? We're trading futures on terror? It was quickly shut down. Somebody remembered Poindexter's idea, because by the 2010s, predictive markets didn't seem as abhorrent, and they took a foothold. Today they are big business. Are they doing anything to counter the failure of imagination? Or is it simply that a lot of money is exchanging hands? Well, it depends how we study them. I mean, after all, betting on the color of Taylor Swift's wedding dress may not actually be doing anything to make the world safer. Predictive markets are to the markets what Twitter and Facebook were to traditional media. You know the story. When Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube began to dominate our screen time, it let us control our own content, even create it. Broadcast executives and networks were no longer the gatekeepers. We were. Similarly, part of the predictive market's appeal is that we can invest, because remember, you're not just making a bet, you're buying shares, and you can watch them fluctuate in real time, minute to minute, day to day, week to week. But really what you're investing in is things that interest you. So you can go to the stock market and invest in some offshore drilling program, or you can go to predictive markets and invest in the release date of the next Avatar movie. And as much as YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook are a great marker of what just happened or what is happening, history is not always, on its own, the greatest predictor of the future. History is helpful, but it becomes irrelevant when anomalies occur in present day. Because just think about it. How often do we say we live in unprecedented times? This has never happened before. Because that's how it works. Something has never happened before, and then it happens. It is hoped that predictive markets, through the collective consciousness, the wisdom of crowds can engage more of us in what's going on and what's going to happen next. And I'm not talking crowds swayed by a demagogue. There's always that danger. But a crowd that is swayed by talking to each other through a trading platform. Predictive markets, they are huge. Keep an eye on them. Even if you're not going to spend money on it, it's worth knowing about. I wonder if predictive markets will take wagers based on how long predictive markets will last. They must. If not, they should.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.